Well, good afternoon, church. Well, here we are, right? Good Friday. The other day, one of my friends I work with, a young woman, her name's Tara, she was telling me a story. She has 3 little kids, little cuties. She's a suburbanite type of a person, and she's trying to be like a little gentleman farmer. So she has chickens and ducks, and they're trying to raise other animals, and they're going to have a garden, all that good stuff. Well, anybody who's raised any type of animals knows that there's always an inevitable time that you have to face when one of them passes away. Her 3-year-old daughter was out feeding the chickens and the ducks 2 days ago, and one of the ducks had passed away, had died. She's 3, and she was very upset. She asked her mom, "What happened? What happened?" And she says, "Well, honey, he was sick, and then he died." And she goes, "Well, if I get sick, am I going to die?" Well, break your heart, huh? So most parents have had to have that difficult conversation with their children to talk to them about death. Death leaves a really hard spot in our heart, doesn't it? A 3-year-old can understand it, maybe better than I can understand it at times. The 3-year-old was all worried that mommy was going to die or daddy was going to die if they got sick. They're all worried about them, their brothers and sisters. What happens? We've questioned this throughout our whole existence, haven't we? What happens? You and I know what happens, don't we? But today we can be in that mournful stage where we realize that life is very precious, that it's more precious than we usually understand, that we have a responsibility to God to treat our life and the life of others with respect and, adoration. We know in a couple of days we'll be celebrating the resurrection. We know that. It's our little secret, isn't it, that we have over the rest of the world. We as believers believe that this isn't the end. We're not going to just be placed in the ground and that's it. We believe in the resurrection. But that still doesn't make it easy, does it? All of us mourn, I'm sure, for someone who's gone on ahead of us. A day probably doesn't pass by when I talk to my grandfather, who's been dead for 14 years. Leaves that empty spot in your heart. God's the only way we can fill that empty spot. God is the only one who can take that darkness from us. We can't do it by just doing more yoga or eating better or, thinking that everything's going to be great. We have to do it by believing in God, carrying that cross, being able to be a person that someone can lean on, to be able to share their own sorrow. We can help one another with all of these things. That cross that I'm going to bring in a few minutes, it means more than just a representation, doesn't it? We believe that it's our own struggle, that we, like Simon, have been asked to carry that cross. Sometimes we don't want to. Sometimes we want to run the other way and just think everything's going to be perfect. But God's with us when our life is messy. God's with us when our life is just full of joy. God is with us before we even know that there's an us, right? And God is with us way long after we know that we were a were. God is with us as we climb our mountains and as we descend into our valleys, as we go through our storms, and as we sit together in celebration. But that hurt comes because God has given us this love. We couldn't have the love that we have without knowing the other side. So sometimes it's okay to enter into that darkness. Sometimes it's okay to be able to be engulfed by it. For it keeps us real, doesn't it? It keeps us that preciousness of that 3-year-old little girl. What happens, Mommy? Right? What happens? I don't want you to go, is what she's saying. I don't want this to happen. Right? But God is with us. We're never alone. You and I have a responsibility as believers to be able to share this with all of those around us. I myself am not a very good evangelist, not by my words anyhow. But God wants us to be a great evangelist by our deeds, by our spirit, by our act of love. May we continue to see the world, maybe like that 3-year-old, full of awe and wonder, full of joy and anticipation, full of sorrow, and then most importantly, full of hope and full of love.